Okay, we got Dan Cohen in the house. Actually, in your house. We are at Human Powered Health in Wellesley, which is the newest location.
It is our newest location, our third human performance lab.
Yep, and I appreciate you wearing the protocol gear today.
I appreciate the invite and looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, excited to talk with you, and we definitely want to get into all things human powered health, but I want to start with your background because it's unique and I think relevant. You were a professional triathlete.
I was, yes, and so I've always been an athlete. Hockey, soccer. I played hockey up through my sophomore year in college. Got injured and then just quit. Got pretty out of shape, and after college, I started running and just immediately fell in love with it. And started asking myself questions about, why are my legs feeling like this? Why am I breathing so heavy? And so really started to get into the physiology component of it. And then, found triathlon and of course fell in love with that. But I didn't have a background in swimming or biking. So that was, interesting to figure that out. Mm-hmm. But, picked it up pretty quickly and did my first triathlon in '99 and started, raced at more of an amateur elite level. And then in 2006 or so, I got my pro card and banged around the circuit for a little bit. I had some fun. So
you're like me. I anticipated you had some sort of background in one of the three. You didn't really.
I did not.
Yeah.
No. It was just hard work and, mental toughness. And, the technology was way different than it is now. The nutrition, what we know about nutrition was way different back then. Things have just changed and advanced, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
But it was a great experience. I started a coaching business as well as part of that. And that was back in 2006 with a couple guys, and that ultimately was absorbed into United Health Group, which is Fortune 5 largest healthcare company in the world, and spent 12 years there in various capacities, mainly around prevention, wellness, those types of innovation and R&D, and learned a lot about our healthcare system. So,
very cool. Is there an accomplishment from your athletic days that you are most proud of?
I can't point to a specific race, but one thing that I learned is that the long distance, the Ironman distance races were just not built for me, but I kept at it and tried my best. So I was really proud of the fact that I learned from each race, but ultimately I just finally discovered that I could go into these races really fit, VO2 Max, lactate threshold, all of that. But the challenge for me was always nutrition, and so I was proud of the fact that I was able to keep trying Ironman, even though I knew that wasn't my best distance. I was much better at the shorter Olympic kind of half.
Yeah. Do you feel if you had the Mortons and the stuff like that today that would be solved for you probably? It
would have been a completely different story.
Yeah.
I just could not eat during Ironman races.
Yeah.
And as we know, if you can't eat, it's a forced sport.
Yep.
Then you're not going to perform to your best.
Yeah.
So, but I love the shorter distance races, the Olympic distance and half Ironman, and that's kind of where I played.
Yeah.
So
at Human Powered Health, how long now? When did you join?
A little over 2 years. Mm-hmm. So I spent 12 years at United Health Group and transitioned right over to Human Powered Health, and we've grown considerably in a short period of time, from a couple people to over 50 now.
Yep. And originally it started in Minnesota?
In Minnesota, yep. Central Twin Cities, Minnesota, in a suburb called Edina.
Yep.
That's our first lab. We opened that last year in April. And, it's going well. And we'll be opening another one in Scottsdale here towards the back half of the year, so likely November timeframe. And so we'll have 4 labs in a 2-year period, which is pretty significant growth. And then we'll look to see what we're going to do next year.
Yeah, and is there some thinking around Scottsdale being kind of a training ground, and Boston obviously with the Boston Marathon and everything, so you're picking locations that make sense on that front?
Yeah, I mean, we're strategically picking markets, but at the end of the day, we wanted to have a footprint on the western part of the country, the central, and then the east, and then from there expand. But it's really around partnerships, and what we found is that if we can, find a partner, and in Scottsdale, it's a group called Endurance Rehab, which is a physical therapy business. It's a really good referral mechanism, very, very similar to what we're doing here with Wellness in Motion. We complement each other's services, completing the circle of health and human performance by including holistic health and rehabilitation into that. It's a good synergy. So that's likely what we're going to be doing going forward is partnering with physical therapy groups and other groups like Protocol to get our services out and to drive the impact that we want to make.
Yeah. Well, I want to get into what you guys do in the test and a bunch of questions that hopefully can provide some value to listeners that are interested in this stuff. And I think my first question is, like, it's obvious to me as an athlete in yourself, and people knowing the tests you do, like, it's obvious to see how these apply to elite athletes and top performers and whatnot. I'm curious, and I think people in the protocol system who are coming here and doing their testing, how sort of these tests translate to the average person, and how they're beneficial to them.
No, absolutely. We're focused on all-cause mortality. And everything that we do in our lab experience is based off of research and science and the information that we have. So when we first started our lab business, it was pretty clear who we focused on, and that was the elite level athletes, because we wanted to learn from that demographic. They get it, they understand the technology that we're using, they understand the assessments and how it can help improve the performance. And from that, we were able to just refine our protocols, because at the end of the day, we want to bring this downstream to focus on the general population. All the equipment that we have here can be applied to any demographic. It's just about changing protocols and the approach for that individual. VO2 Max, for example. We know that VO2 Max, from decades of research, is very likely the number one predictor of all-cause mortality. For a lot of different reasons. And, obviously if we're going to bring somebody in whose general population is just focused on, what is my aerobic capacity, we're not going to put them through a protocol like you would go through, or a professional Olympian that would come in and do it. That'd be completely different, but you're going to get the same metrics in terms of where that person is at. And then from there, we'll create the recommendations based on that person. So everything that we do here can be applied to any population. It's just the approach and the protocols that we're going to adapt.
Yeah, gotcha. So let's stay on that thread if we can. So say the average, let's say early 60s person maybe is relatively healthy, but is trying to maybe reduce their weight, get their blood pressure down, thinking about kind of staving off disease as they start to get older. Like, what does the human powered health experience look like for that type of person? And I know it's personalized, but maybe.
I mean, the end-to-end experience is people can go to our website. We've got our assessments there. We have standard packages built out for many different demographics. So this would be like more of a longevity package, and or they can create their own. If somebody wants to just come in and do specific assessments. But most people will do a virtual consult with one of our performance physiologists. And that's a critical first step, because the performance physiologists, who all have masters or PhDs, so they really understand this stuff, will be able to talk with the individual, learn strengths, limiters, goals, objectives, and be able to say, okay, well, these assessments make sense. So for that particular individual who wants to lose weight and, get some baseline metrics, very likely they would be doing an RMR test so we can understand precisely the amount of calories that they need at rest. Very important, obviously, from a weight loss perspective.
Would you explain that test briefly?
Yeah, resting metabolic rate test is we would hook them up to our CosMed metabolic cart. They would be wearing a mask, and we'd be measuring the amount of oxygen consumed and the amount of carbon dioxide produced at rest. And from that, we can derive lots of different things. So calories, and the substrates that they're using. So are they primarily using fatty acids for energy production at rest, which is the best case scenario? Or are they, pushing too hard, and maybe they're using their metabolism is geared more towards utilizing carbohydrates, which would not be very good at rest. That means that they would be metabolically inflexible, and we would have to recommend very specific things for them to do to remedy that.
And is that
about a 15-20 minute test?
Yeah.
Non-invasive. You just wear a mask, you relax, and then we get the data from that.
Yeah, and are those recommendations, are they diet? Are they type of training? Like what areas do you touch on?
It would be, it could be both, but mainly diet. So then we could refer that individual to our registered dietitian that would then be able to, create the nutritional plan and recommendations from that. Yeah. For this particular individual, we'd obviously want to do a VO2 Max test. And again, it could be a full-on test using a different protocol where we're actually getting max, or it could be sub-max, depending on the individual. And then from there, we can, get zones and at least a baseline of where they need to start to build an exercise regimen.
Right.
We'd probably have them do a gait analysis just to see if they're moving efficiently. And probably a DEXA scan. I mean, not probably, we would actually absolutely want to do a DEXA scan.
Yeah.
I just had mine done this morning.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, so I retested from last year, and I was pleased with the numbers.
Nice.
So,
well, I have a bunch of questions on DEXA, but I want to go back to VO2 Max.
Yeah.
And those are the two tests we do at Protocol regularly.
Yeah.
But in your own words, what is a VO2 Max, and what are you looking at?
Yeah.
When you do the test?
Yeah, so VO2 max is the max amount of oxygen that you can consume at exercise. And so think of it as your ceiling, your aerobic capacity, your max effort. And you can learn lots of different information from that. First of all, we'll know where you land from a normative data perspective of where you land from your age group. And we know that again, VO2 is correlated with longevity or all-cause mortality. So you want to know that information so you can figure out how to improve it. We can understand their lactate threshold. Now, for the general population, that's probably not going to be very relevant if they're just starting an exercise program. But for somebody like you or somebody's a serious athlete, you're going to want to know where your lactate threshold is. What's the point where you start to produce more lactate than you can clear? From there, then you can get power zones and other types of things. But typically, you hook an individual up again to the metabolic cart. You're wearing a mask. You can conduct it on any piece of equipment. Typically, it's done on a treadmill or a cycling ergometer, or we use Wahoo kickers to set people up on their own bikes, and we run protocols through that. But it's a graded exercise test. So you start off really slow, and then we just ramp up the intensity and bring the person to a maximum effort. It's exhausting.
Do you go, I've done a few different ones. Do you go till person can't go anymore, or are you looking at a graph of the oxygen coming in and when it plateaus, you
it depends on the individual, but typically we're looking at the RQ, the respiratory quotient, which we need to have at a certain level to know that person's hit a maximum effort. And at that point, the rest of the data is more how hard you want to push.
Right. How tough you are to maintain
is it
that.
necessary to go beyond that? Probably not from a data perspective, but some people, of course, want to go until they drop. Obviously, they're not falling off the back of a treadmill or anything like that. But for the general population, somebody who's looking for longevity type numbers, we would do a completely different protocol. It'd likely be more of a ramp, so we're not so much a speed test. We do a Bruce protocol probably, and that would be a ramp test where you're not having to move very quickly, but you can get to a maximum effort just from the incline itself.
Gotcha.
For somebody like you, we would do more of a speed-based VO2 because we want to get run paces or bike paces for your training.
Yeah. On that note, a question I had, and I know others have had, for somebody like yourself or like me who are strong cyclists, strong runners, is there going to be a big difference versus a VO2 max on the bike versus run? And should you do if there is a stronger one, should you do it on that? Or
it's a very good question and a very common question.
Okay.
So VO2 max is really a product of how much, at the simplest terms, it's how much blood you're able to pump out, how effective you can pump out blood and then extract the oxygen from that blood to use to create energy, ATP. And the more muscle mass you're using, the higher your VO2 tends to be. So typically, you could see a 10 to 15% differential between a bike VO2 max and a treadmill VO2 max. That's just because you're using more muscle mass on the treadmill than a bike, right? You're just using your legs primarily on the bike. But for, let's say, an endurance athlete, a triathlete that is training for an Ironman, that individual should do both. Mm-hmm. And, the timing of the VO2 and when you're doing them probably needs to be discussed with your coach or somebody or one of our performance physiologists to see when the best time is to stagger those. But because the bike leg is so long on an Ironman, you're going to want to do a VO2 on the bike so that you can get very precise metrics around power, heart rate, etc. And you want to do it on the run as well. But for most people, if they're general triathletes and they're doing sprint or Olympic, even half, I would say a treadmill would be just fine. It's really dependent on the person and their goals.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I've done a few different tests, and I actually learned from you that the systems that are used to test VO2 maxes are very different.
They're different.
I did the PNOE and tested at like an 84, and you were like, no, that's probably not very accurate.
Don't want to break it to you.
I was disappointed, but in terms of like the Garmin estimation that you get on your watch for VO2 max. Or like, the backpack systems like PNOE or these at-home ones, like how inaccurate or close to accurate are those typically?
In general, there's a profound difference. It is. The technology is different. The sensors that they're using are different. Some have a CO2 and O2, some don't. And so our preference is to go with an actual metabolic cart that is used in research at universities, at cardiac rehab facilities, because we know it's the best technology. Mm-hmm. But the Garmins and the PNOEs and those types of things can give you trends, right? So if you just want to know directionally, am I improving? Yeah, your Garmin can estimate your VO2, and it's likely not right. Some cases, I've seen it.
It might be in the ballpark.
It's in the ballpark, but in general, it's different. For example, one of my colleagues just got an Oura ring, and apparently you can get a VO2 estimate on an Oura ring now.
Okay.
It was about 50% off of where he was. So that's just an example.
That's significant, yep.
But, directionally he could, see if he's improving. But if you want accuracy, you really do need to leverage a full-on CPET metabolic cart to get that.
Yeah. So what's an elite score, and then maybe let's take that 60-year-old example and say like what's maybe a good score for that sort of individual?
Yeah. So for the general population, basically for anybody, after I believe around the age 25, VO2 tends to decrease roughly 10% or so.
Every year? Continuously?
Yeah. Every decade.
Every decade?
Every decade,
okay.
Yeah.
And is that just simply aging, or is that because people are becoming less active, or
I think it's a product
of
of both, but mainly because they're not active. Yeah. And, as people age and, orthopedics pop up, you're not as active and life gets in the way, that can have an impact. But there's definitely a physiological component that, keeps it from increasing linearly. And so, but you can absolutely maintain your VO2 max, and more importantly, the percentage that you can work at it as you age. Mm-hmm. And that's really what we're talking about here. Is it doesn't matter where your VO2 is, right? It's mainly genetically set. What we're really focused on is the percentage that you can work at it, and if you can maintain that over the years. Because if you can do that, statistically speaking, you should live a long, healthy life. If you take the top 2.5% of VO2 maxes, so the endurance athletes, the cross-country skiers, the runners, triathletes, et cetera, and compare it to the bottom 25%, there's about a 5-fold increase in all-cause mortality. It's profound. So I would say, for me, if you're looking at normative data, I'm 50. In the 40s would be top, right?
Yeah.
But then if you're looking at a professional triathlete, a male professional triathlete, they're typically in the 70s, 80s, some in the 90s. Females tend to be just a little bit lower just because of, physiology and the muscle mass. But so I mean, endurance athletes, I would say for both male and female, 60 to 90-ish, roughly, depending on where they are.
Yep. And obviously, if you are able to maintain or slowly increase that VO2 max, even as you're aging, my understanding is that a lot of the other, metrics associated with living longer are going to improve alongside with it. And that's kind of the idea. Heart rate variability, resting heart rate, metabolism, how efficient your mitochondria are at oxidizing fatty acids to produce energy. All of these things are going to improve, and that's what you want. Yeah. I mean, it really, that's what you want. So if you could prescribe to, again, maybe let's use that 60-year-old example, a protocol to improve that VO2 max for the typical person that's able to run a little bit and cycle a little bit. Yeah. What's the combination of like zone 2 versus high intensity? Yeah. How do you?
So for somebody who's just really kind of getting into moving or an exercise program, I would say the most important focus would be that zone 2-ish, sprinkling in some higher intensity just until they get a base. And you can improve a lot just from that, just from the fact that your pace is improving, your ability to utilize fat as fuel is improving, your mitochondria are becoming more efficient, etc. You start to, obviously increase the amount of capillaries they have, and all these other physiological things that are associated with exercise improve. But once you get to a certain point, if you want to truly maximize your VO2, like for you, for example, you'd want to do intervals, hard intervals, 90% plus, 4 to 5 minutes with equal rest, so that you can, because really what you're trying to do is get volume at your max.
All right. So you're doing like a
4 by 5,
yes,
4
exactly.
by 5 minutes,
4 by 4 minute, 4 by 5 minute.
Very hard. Aggressive, basically to the point where you can just barely make the 5 minutes,
Right.
then you recover for 4 or 5 minutes, and then you do it again. That would be the best way.
Yep.
Whether it's on the bike or the treadmill.
And that's probably once, maybe twice a week if you're training every day and training hard.
Once a week
Everything
for
else
sure.
being mostly zone 2.
Yeah, once a week for sure.
Yeah.
Twice a week for more serious athletes who can handle that volume and intensity. It takes a while, but
Yeah.
I mean, that would probably be the best way to bump up your VO2. Obviously, there would be other shorter intervals, 1 minute, 10 by 1 minute at 100%. Those types of things are certainly going to help improve as well.
Yeah. All right, so I want to get back to DEXA scan that you mentioned earlier. Can you give us, similar to what you did with VO2, kind of the overview, what you're looking at, what's important, maybe what isn't so important?
Yeah. So DEXA, as I said, I had mine done this morning. DEXAs are the gold standard for body composition. If you look at the research, you compare it with skin fold and underwater weighing, which, is kind of obsolete. It's
underwater weighing? I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah. You typically don't do that anymore. Or, an in-body, those types of things. Bod pod. DEXA is by far the most accurate. So it stands for dual X-ray absorptiometry. It's difficult to say. They're hard to find. They're hard to access. And typically you have to go to a hospital system, some sort of medical clinic. And that's one of the issues that we're trying to solve, is making this stuff accessible to the general population. So they don't have to go to a university or some dungeon somewhere to get a DEXA scan.
Right.
But in its simplest terms, it's able to measure your muscle mass, your fat mass, both subcutaneous and visceral, which is absolutely critically important, and your bone mineral density. And obviously, as we age and bone mineral density can tend to go down, you want to know those metrics. For me, the visceral fat piece is really critical, because we know that the visceral fat is the fat that's wrapped around your organs. And the subcutaneous fat is the fat that typically people, more the vanity fat. You see it on your body. While not good, it's certainly not as harmful as visceral. Visceral can have a pretty significant impact on metabolic systems. There's increased inflammation. There's problems with lipid profiles. All kinds of harmful things. And quite honestly, it's probably driving the vast majority of the metabolic disease in this country. But people have no idea how much visceral fat they have on their body. Mm-hmm. I've got a pound, which is very, very good to see. For example, we had an individual that had come into one of our labs, and they had a pretty significant amount of visceral fat. Gave him an exercise regimen, have him work with a registered dietitian, came back, I believe it was 6 months later or so, and he's back in line. So you can change that. Mm-hmm. The bone mineral density piece, obviously, if you're osteopenic or at risk for osteoporosis as you age, you want to know those numbers, so then you can tailor very specific resistance training protocols to help build that up, and make sure that you're not continuing to lose bone mineral density. It's a very easy non-invasive test. There are certain things you need to do, like no alcohol the day before, no really intense exercise the day before. Best to come in fasted, about 10 hours or so. Show up to the lab. You can't wear metal on your body. Mm-hmm. And then you just basically lay down, and you can get a total body scan, or you can get into segmented areas of the body. So if somebody knows for sure that they've got some issues in their lumbar spine, for example, we can just segment out that section and do a DEXA there to see where we're at. And then, of course, we've got rehabilitation specialists right here that we can refer people to if anything is off. Yeah. We're not in the business of diagnosing. We can identify if an individual, just based off of the data, if they're osteopenic or have osteoporosis, and then we would make the appropriate referral to handle that situation.
Yeah. I want to focus on the visceral fat, which seems to be the most important metric you're looking at. I find that interesting because I think there's a lot of people that are maybe, for lack of a better term, like skinny fat, or even in good shape bodybuilder type people that will do a DEXA scan and have much higher visceral fat than you would think by looking at them. And those are the people that are often kicked out of their doctor's office, in their 30s. They're like, what the hell are you doing here? You're in perfect weight. They pass everything with flying colors. But if they were to do a DEXA scan, it might tell a different story. Yeah. And I'm curious your thoughts on that, but also like at what point how many pounds of visceral fat does it start to look like it's a problem?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to get the exact numbers. I don't know, but I know that, where I was at, a pound is nothing. Yeah. And that was no concern whatsoever. So I'd have to get back to you on the exact percentage that we're looking at. But you can clearly see the cost of an unhealthy diet or lack of exercise. And you're exactly right. I think there's a lot of individuals that are walking around that feel like they're fit and healthy, but the reality is there's something going on inside that is creating a metabolic disaster. And I would be willing to bet if you were to do blood work, you would see some markers that would indicate that to be true. So,
yeah, and that visceral fat most of the time goes hand in hand with other things being too high throughout the body,
lifestyle
and disease and all that.
It's
rare to have somebody with a chronic disease that does not have, that has 0.5% visceral fat. Is that fair to say?
Is what?
It's rare to see somebody with low visceral fat but has chronic disease, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a direct correlation to how much visceral fat you have in metabolic disease or cardiovascular disease. Your lipid panel will likely be upside down if you have a high amount of visceral fat in your body. Chances are. I mean, everybody's different, but
right. On both of these tests, the DEXA and the VO2 Max, they're both obviously you don't manipulate visceral fat and VO2 Max especially quickly. Right. So like, how often should we be doing the test?
Yeah, I think for the general population, one time a year would be adequate. I think if somebody is really, really looking to lose a significant amount of weight, or they've had a DEXA and it was really high, visceral fat wise, you probably want to do it twice just to see. But I think in general, once or twice a year would be plenty for most people. Yeah.
And is there any, so outside of those, so if you were to say, like, here's what the average person should do annually, if those two tests are annually, are there any other tests at Human Powered Health that you would throw in that annual bucket?
I would do a gait. We know that gait, there is a predictor of longevity if you think about it. As you age, obviously, your biomechanics can be off and you could cause falls and other things. But a lot of people just don't move efficiently from a mechanical perspective. And our gait analysis is a great way to understand how efficient you are and how economical you are while you're running or walking or hiking or whatever you're doing. So I would include that as well. And then also, very basic grip strength. We're actually getting a new handheld dynamometer next week here in this lab through our partners at Cohen Dynamics, who do our force plates. And that'll likely be bundled into more of a longevity type package because we can measure the amount of force very precisely using this device.
Yeah, explain that one, the grip strength, and why that's relevant.
Yeah, I mean, grip strength, if you look at the research, it's correlated to all-cause mortality. It makes sense if you can, grip really strong, then you're probably in general strong. So I think that's probably one of the components there. But there's some research around push-ups, for example. Mm-hmm. Males who can do 40 push-ups compared to those that can only do 10, there's a profound difference there. I mean, it makes complete sense. They're stronger. They're probably more metabolically healthy. So strength is a whole nother component that we want to measure, whether it's grip strength or some other form. We want to do that. So I would say RMR, resting metabolic rate test, VO2 max test, a DEXA, in some form of strength test would be a very good place to start for somebody who's looking to just get baseline numbers to improve their health.
Yeah, if you had to weigh the two of strength and VO2 max.
VO2
you would take. Yeah.
All day long. Yeah.
All day long.
Yeah.
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 Interesting.
Yeah. So I think it's a critically important metric for people to know. Yes, the test can be strenuous, but at the end of the day, you're getting very, very important metrics, and it should give you a good gauge of where you're at, and it's movable. As you get, the fitter and fitter you get, it's going to be difficult to move, right? You have somebody who's got an 80 VO2, you put them through a training regimen, you're not going to see a 90 the next time you test. Very likely you could, but likely not. But for somebody who's coming in and say they, relative to their body weight, they're a 30 VO2, you can put them through an exercise program, a nutrition program, bring them back 6 months later, and you could see a 45 or a 50.
Wow, yeah.
Which would be profound. We actually just had a guy who just came in here. He's an active triathlete. And he improved by 10 mLs in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
Which is profound.
In a matter of months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's profound.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Are there any advancements coming that you're aware of, maybe via human-powered health, or just you've seen out and about that you think are interesting and could maybe help move the needle even further with, health span and
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on right now, as you guys know, with the longevity piece. A lot of clinics that are opening up. At the end of the day, I think, we're going to find that it's VO2, it's DEXA, it's strength, those types of things. But it's more what you do with this data, I think, is going to advance. And, I think AI is becoming more and more important. It's here to stay. It's not going away. And so that's something that we're going to be utilizing. We have our own AI-based coaching platform called HumanGo, which takes insights from the individual goals, strengths, weaknesses, sync up with 14 different devices and applications, and then it will craft a periodized plan based off of your physiology. We are going to be evolving that. So all the data that flows in from the lab will go right into HumanGo, then refine their prescription on a daily, hourly, minute-by-minute basis. It kind of lives and breathes with you. But we're going to be incorporating nutrition into that as well. And so think of it as a digital center of excellence for health and human performance. That's
very cool.
What we're going to be developing.
If you could wave a magic wand and you're in control of the healthcare system here in the U.S., how would you see all the things you're doing at Human Powered Health interacting with your typical primary care doctor or other pieces of that system? Yeah,
that's a great question. Like I said, I spent 12 years at the largest healthcare company in the world, and I don't think it's a surprise to Americans that our healthcare system is very inefficient. There's a lot of waste. There's a lot of redundancy. There's a lot of things that aren't working well. At the end of the day, I think it comes down to taking more of a proactive versus reactive approach, where that's just the way we're set up. You get sick, you go to the doctor. Or if you're an employee and you're on an employee benefits program and you are doing some sort of incentive-based approach where you get your finger pricked, and you get your blood panel, your cholesterol, glucose, triglycerides, your BMI, all that stuff. And then your doctor says, okay, well, what do they say? They say, well, you need to lose weight.
You lose weight.
And you need to exercise. So you need to eat better, and that's the extent of it.
And you're in the 60th percentile of a sick population, just so you know.
Yeah.
What does that mean to me? Nothing.
But that's the extent of it.
Yeah.
They're not set up for anything more than telling you that you need to lose weight or exercise and start eating better. What we want to get to the point of is, I go to my doctor, I get my blood work. I'm told that some of these values are off and I need to do these specific things. I want them to write a prescription to Human Powered Health or a prescription to Protocol to get these metrics that we know based off of years of research can move the needle significantly on health and cardiometabolic health, for example. And then I want you to get those tests done. I want to, as a provider, I want to see that data. And then I want you to get on a plan to improve that. So the next time you come back in 6 months, I want to see, this value here, this value here. I want to see an improvement in your VO2. I want to see your visceral fat go down. That's what we need to get to. It's going to take time, but I think eventually the healthcare system is going to have to capitulate and understand that we need to do something different. There's just no other way around it. We know that lifestyle is driving the vast majority of the chronic disease in this country. There's no secret. But why aren't things getting better? And our approach is that people need data. They need to understand where they're at with real actionable metrics and data. And then they need to support to get there. We need to meet people where they're at and stop this vicious cycle of reactive healthcare, and get rid of all the excuses that people come up with. Time and money and all this, I get it, but you don't have to be an Olympian to make very significant improvements in your health. You just need the willingness and the readiness to change. So that's my view.
I love it. That was very well said.
Yeah.
I know you got to get on a plane in like 10 minutes here. So I got only one more for you, and then we'll wrap it up. If you could only give 2 pieces of advice to someone out there that is trying to improve their health, what are the top 2 you would give?
Yeah. Get on an exercise program, improve your VO2 max, work at the highest percentage of your VO2 max that you can, and start a strength training program, a minimum of 2 times a week, full body, and eat a balanced diet. If you can do those things, you should, barring something that you can't control, you should live a full, productive, healthy life. That's what the research shows us. The researchers showed us that for decades. We need to do it.
Yeah.
We need to do it. So I would say VO2, nutrition, and strength are very critical. Yeah.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate you taking the time, and I want to, before we sign off, just give you a shout out for the work you're doing, trying to get people healthy, and the mission of Human Powered Health is incredible, and very much we share that at Protocol, and we're just honored to have you and appreciate what you're doing. So shout out to you.
Yeah, likewise. I think what you guys are doing there at Protocol is exactly what we need to be doing, and that's the direction that our country, the globe needs to go, is to provide individuals with actionable, real data and help guide them, and let them know that you don't have to do a lot to make a big impact, but you got to do something. So, appreciate the work you guys are doing as well, and for inviting me on here, and looking forward to more conversations.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you.